Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video I'm continuing my series in which I go through and decide which players in the NBA I would or would not protect in a potential expansion draft scenario. We are 2 videos away from getting to the actual draft. In today's video I'm going to be covering the Southeast Division, and then in next week's video will be the Northwest Division, and then we will get to the actual drafting of 2 entirely new NBA teams. As always, the rules are on screen if you're confused, and go check out any of the previous 4 episodes that I've done if you want to see what I did with those teams as well. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day. One quick thing to mention, however, before we get started, I did upload to Gaming Logically today. It's been over 250 days since I put anything up over on that channel, but I'm committed to uploading incredibly consistently every single day on that channel with a ton of different 2K content. Today's video is about what would have happened if Tracy McGrady had stayed in Toronto rather than left in 2000 and him and Vince Carter had stayed together. How many MVPs would they have won? How many championships would they have won? Doing an entire 15-year simulation from all the way back in 2000 of those Raptors teams. I have an old roster that I'm dealing with as well. It's a simulation rather than a rebuild, just to kind of see what 2K would do with that group. And moving forward, I'm going to be putting out even more content over there as well. So if you're interested in that, I know a lot of you guys have already subscribed to that channel in the past. There is going to be a lot more content coming over there, so be sure to check that out if you haven't, and check out today's upload as well. Okay, with that said, we're going to go ahead and start with the Miami Heat. They have 9 players under contract, and it's relatively simple here. There's a couple of younger players at the end of the roster that you kind of have to decide which one you would rather have. Ultimately, it really isn't all that impactful to their actual roster. It's either KZ Okpala or Chris Silva. For me personally, I'm going to choose Okpala. Not really any particular reason behind that. I just kind of decided that is who I'd rather keep, and I'm not going to spend too much time on that group. Moving on now to the Orlando Magic, who actually do have some interesting things to talk about here. They have 11 players under contract, so they're going to leave 3 of them unprotected. And I pretty much knew someone like James Ennis, Melvin Frazier, those guys are not going to stick around. The problem was, do I want to keep Al-Farouq Aminu and his relatively large contract for the next couple of seasons, or do I want to keep someone like Khem Birch? And at first I was like, okay, I'll just let Al-Farouq Aminu go because of the salary cap issues involved with keeping him on that contract. It's a contract they probably already regret. But the more that I thought about it, I actually flipped it around the other way, because the Magic have plenty of depth at the 4 and 5 spots which allows them to let someone like Khem Birch potentially walk in an expansion draft scenario, but they need more depth on the wings, and I'd rather have someone that can guard and play the 3 and the 4 rather than the 4 and the 5 on this particular roster group that already has Nikola Vucevic and Mo Bamba at the 5 spot. I could easily see how you would make the argument that it's more beneficial to leave Aminu unprotected rather than Birch here, but that's just the direction I'm going in. The third team in the division now is the Washington Wizards, and they have 10 players under contract, which means we're leaving 2 unprotected. And this is a more interesting team than I thought it was going to be, because they actually have a handful of really interesting younger players even at the bottom of their roster. And for me, it was a pretty difficult decision, but I'm going to leave Jerome Robinson and Isaac Bonga unprotected here. And I decided to keep Admiral Schofield because I really think that he's going to become a solid NBA player. I think he can shoot the basketball. He has the strength, the size, and the athleticism to be able to guard and to defend. And I think he's going to be a solid rotation player moving forward. And I'm not convinced that either Bonga or Robinson are going to be that type of player. And I'd rather keep them over, or I'd rather let them go, over someone like Troy Brown, Mo Wagner, and Admiral Schofield, as I mentioned. So this is a team that, again, I didn't expect to really struggle this much, because they do actually have a good amount of talent at the end of their roster that could turn into something down the road and you'd rather not lose. So the decision of who you would and wouldn't keep is definitely an interesting one here for the Wizards. For me personally, as I said, I'm going to let Robinson and Bonga go unprotected, but if you want to make the argument for Wagner, Brown, or Schofield, I would definitely listen to those arguments. Okay, second to last now is the Charlotte Hornets. They have 10 players under contract, so we're leaving 2 unprotected, and this is going to be the first real contract casualty of this video, and I'm going to leave Nicholas Batum unprotected along with Jalen McDaniels. McDaniels I'm not really worried about, but Batum, it's just because of the amount of money that he is going to be making for this team moving forward, and I would rather let someone else draft him. I would imagine that someone would at least think about picking him up in the expansion draft, and if they don't, there's no harm there anyway. And I just would rather have Terry Rozier, Cody Zeller, Malik Monk, PJ Washington, Miles Bridges, Devontae Graham, Cody Martin, and Caleb Martin on the roster, given their contract situations as it relates to Nicholas Batum's contract situation. I'd rather keep those guys. Now, there's certainly arguments to be made here that maybe you let Malik Monk go, even though he is a talented player. He's currently indefinitely suspended from the league. And then, Cody and Caleb Martin weren't huge contributors to the team. But it's just about the money with Batum. It's about trying to get out from under that contract. It's about trying to maintain some kind of flexibility for this roster moving forward and focusing on the younger guys rather than a 30-year-old Nicholas Batum. That's just where I'm at personally. If he wasn't making that much money, then I probably would have let one of the Martin twins go rather than him, just because I'd rather have the asset on the roster of a potentially tradable player. But Batum's contract just isn't tradable at this point, and I would rather, move on from him and leave him unprotected. And last up now in the division is a similar situation to the Hornets. It's the Atlanta Hawks. They have 9 players under contract, meaning that we are leaving 1 unprotected. And in this scenario, it's going to be Dwayne Dedmon, and it's a very similar thing. It's just because of the contract. This guy makes too much money over the next couple of years, and I'd rather have the younger assets, even all the way down to someone like Brandon Goodwin, who really isn't that important to this team. I'd rather get out from under the money that Dwayne Dedmon has on his deal, assuming that he does get drafted, and then move forward from there with a little bit more flexibility to build what is a young and up-and-coming roster. Now, the future of this Hawks team is going to depend entirely on the development of their younger players, but still to have the flexibility to bring in some other veterans, some other guys that can shoot, depending on where the salary cap space ends up, is going to be a really critical thing for the development of this team moving forward. And I don't think that Dwayne Dedmon is someone that you want to have on the roster in that scenario. I would have rather them not traded for him in the first place. And for me, that's the player that I would be leaving unprotected here. They still have plenty of front court depth with Clint Capella and John Collins. They don't really need Dedmon in the first place, and so I would leave him unprotected. And so as we look here now at the division and the players that we have put into the expansion draft pool from this division, it's not entirely exciting, I won't lie to you. Washington puts in a couple of interesting names in Jerome Robinson and Isaac Bonga. Kem Birch could be a nice rotation big for a different team coming out of Orlando there. And then Nicholas Batum and Dwayne Dedmon are the biggest names here, but also carry the biggest contract. So not necessarily a hugely talented division in terms of what they're contributing to the expansion draft, but there are some interesting scenarios in terms of who they would or wouldn't give up just based entirely on the contracts of these players, and then whether or not the new teams would deem it worthy to draft these players even given the contracts and things like that. And it's going to depend kind of on the situation of the expansion draft teams. What I'm probably going to end up doing when I do the expansion draft is have one team that's focused more on just building a young group and moving forward from there, and another that's focused a little bit more on trying to be at least solid when they first enter the league rather than really, really bad. So for that team that wants to be, at least kind of an okay team, maybe Nicholas Batum and Dwayne Dedmon end up being picked up by that team because they're not entirely worried about being over or being up at near the salary cap, because they're going to have cheap players throughout the roster regardless. So it's going to be interesting to kind of evaluate how I would go through and pick these players depending on, the mindset of each of the expansion teams that I do select. But still, I'm interested to see where we're going to go from here with this last division. We've got one more, as I said, with, I think the division includes like the Trailblazers and teams like that. And then we'll be moving forward with the expansion draft and finishing up this series. Again, as always, I appreciate the support on the series. You guys continue to give any kind of opinions, comments, things like that you guys have for improvements to the series, as well as just, that, like I said, that support that allows me to keep going, and to know that you guys are enjoying the videos and the content is much, much appreciated. So that is going to be the end of today's video. And as I said, be looking forward to those future ones, as well as that Gaming Logically video that I put up today as well. But that is going to be the end of today's video. As I said in the beginning, my name is Tucker. I thank you all very much for watching. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.